Hi, I'm Benton Stokes.
And I'm Elane O'Rourke.
And this is Cocktail Theology. Okay, so tonight's cocktail I found on a website that you actually told me about called Tuxedo Number 2. Mm-hmm. The cocktail that I chose is very dry, almost no sweet.
Okay.
It's called Pressure Drop.
Okay.
It came from Death & Co., which is a famous bar in New York City.
Yes.
And it's Old Tom Gin,
Okay.
Dry Vermouth,
Okay.
Amaro Nonino,
Okay.
Calvados,
Okay.
and Angostura bitters.
Okay, so if it's got sweetness, it's getting it from the Amaro and from the Old Tom.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm ready.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the Ford cocktail that we did a couple of episodes ago was sort of a spin on the Martinez.
Yep.
This is as well.
Okay.
And a Martinez is kind of an old classic martini predecessor.
Yes.
That is on the dry side and generally used Old Tom or a very juniper forward gin.
Okay, all right. I like it.
Yeah?
It's actually amazingly sweet, given what's in it. I mean, in comparison to like the gin martinis that I make that have like where you just kind of wave the vermouth bottle over the top.
Right.
So this is very sweet in comparison to that.
Yeah, it's funny. It has almost no Calvados in it, but I can taste it.
It's really strong. Cool. Because we're going to need this for this conversation tonight, I think.
Well, this was an idea that you had about Christians caring about politics, and it's a fairly layered question.
So basically what I was asking is, why should Christians care who's in the House? And I meant the House of Representatives.
Okay.
And if we do, then liberals and all the rest of us on that side need to care about God a lot more. The question was spurred by the new Speaker of the House, who claims to be Christian.
Yes.
And I say that because I am not able to judge whether he is Christian or not, but that is the stance that he stands on when he is trying to put things forward. Mm-hmm. So it made me think, well, so what? Mm-hmm. So what if he's Christian?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Like, is it important that he's Christian because he'll advance a Christian agenda? Mm-hmm. Is it important that he's Christian because it'll inform his personal morality? Mm. Is it like why do we care? I mean, I think we have to start there.
Right.
Why, if we identify as Christian or Jesus followers anywhere on this tapestry that is, why should we care? Render unto Caesar, render unto God.
Right. Well, yeah. Of course, in our society right now, evangelicals, Christian nationalists, are a very powerful group of people, and they care very much about having quote-unquote Christians, or at least like people like them, in positions of authority. Mm-hmm. So I would understand why people in that camp would celebrate Johnson being the Speaker of the House.
Sure.
Just simply on the fact that he's one of us.
Exactly.
Another one of us in an important seat, right? Because it feels like all they ever really want to do is stack the deck. Right.
And I would say that the liberal end likes to stack the deck too. I mean, it's, of course, right? But exactly, there's that sense of camaraderie, ownership, kinship, something like that.
Right.
Okay. So I get that. I get tribalism underlies all of this.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
But the Christian piece, though, I'm struggling with, and for those of our listeners who don't know me, I have a very long political history. Mm-hmm. So when I am putting these forward as questions, I'm not saying we shouldn't pay attention to politics at all.
Right.
But I'm wondering what it actually means, what it should mean and what it does mean. Okay? Mm-hmm. Setting aside the fact that our country seems to think that a theological oligarchy is actually what we're going for. But setting that aside, let's assume for the moment that we really do think democracy is the way to go.
Yeah.
Okay. As a Christian, what should I be looking for in a person in elected government as a Christian? And should the Christian part matter? Like how does it influence? Like, I would never vote for anybody just because they were Christian, or just because they were Jewish, or just because they were Hindu. Like, none of those things is going to get me to vote for them all by themselves.
Agree. Yeah. Well, I think there was a time in my history when it would have mattered to me, but it would have only mattered to me so far as the people that I was voting for shared my values. I'll put that in big quotes.
Okay.
But like back when I was an anti-abortion proponent, not a proponent, but I voted anti-abortion because of my faith convictions, whatever. That was a concern that I had, was that the candidates that I voted for were anti-choice. Obviously, my positions have changed on all kinds of things in the last 20 years, but I think that I assumed, and I think a lot of Christians do, that if you are voting for, well, it goes both ways. If you're voting for someone who is anti-choice, they share your values. Or if you're voting for someone who shares your values, they are anti-choice.
Gotcha.
Back then, I think I was paying attention to candidates who put themselves forth as Christians, or, you know, any of those other sort of vague terms like family values and whatever.
Right.
Those were all buzzwords that kind of said, you share basically the same values I have.
Okay.
And so I think there are Christians who vote based on people that they believe share their values. But these days, I don't think people who share my values have to share my faith.
And often don't.
Right. So the issues that I care about most these days, they seem to be issues that, you know, liberal and moderate to liberal politicians seem to care about more so than moderate to conservative politicians seem to care about.
Right.
So I'm paying attention to positions on issues, of course, but I'm not, whatever your faith category doesn't really figure into that decision for me anymore.
Okay. So you care about who's in the House of Representatives not because you're a Christian, but because they, in fact, hold stances or values that you do? Is that accurate?
Yes, I would prefer that both houses of Congress and the presidency were occupied by people who share my values.
Right. Okay.
And I think most people who are politically involved would feel the same way.
Sure.
And I think there was a time when those values were sort of carried on party platforms, kind of.
Yep.
So, you know, if you were a Democrat, you could expect most or all Democrats to support the things on the Democratic Party platform. Likewise for the Republicans. However, that's not where we are anymore.
Yeah, no, not even.
Not even close. So you can't really rely on party distinctions either. There are certain assumptions you can make, but like you can't assume that every Democrat supports gay marriage, for instance.
Right.
Because there are some that actually don't.
Right.
You have to pay attention to the issues more so than, is this person a Christian or a person of faith or not?
Right. Okay. Here's what I'm thinking right now as you're talking. I'm thinking, okay, of course we should care about who's in the House, who's in the Senate, who's in, you know, all of those things. If we, in fact, have any say over who's in positions of power, and I could argue either direction in that, but then we should care who's in power.
Yes.
Okay. I do not personally believe that God appoints all people to their positions, because if so, then God would not have appointed both FDR and Teddy, because they were quite different. I mean, you know what I mean? Like you can't say that one's about your candidates and not about the other. All right. So we need to care that, you know, and partly because if we care about public policy of any kind, whether it's healthcare or choice or whatever, and on either side, any side, then we have to care about who's doing it.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I get all that. So here's what I'm thinking as we're talking. I'm thinking that aside from claiming you're a Christian, being a stand-in for a whole list of political things.
Yeah.
Because at this point, you know, I would say since Reagan onwards, saying I'm a Christian means that you're essentially libertarian. used to be conservative, but now it's libertarian. You're anti-choice. You're actually for your freedom, but not other people's.
Yes.
Tend to the racist, tend to the capitalist, and so forth. Okay. And if you don't claim you're a Christian, like if you don't say, I'm Christian, then they assume, we assume, that you're on the other side. Whatever on the other side means.
Mostly,
okay.
yeah.
Okay. So here's the problem that I'm having with all of this.
Yes.
I know you're shocked that I have a problem with this. But here's the problem I've got. I believe that Jesus wants us to care for widows and orphans, to free the captives, to heal the blind, to all of those things, which are really kind of like, they're kind of liberal values.
Yes.
And I'm not saying, I mean, I'm not the kind of person who, stands up and says, Jesus was a homeless progressive, because it doesn't make sense in its context, right?
Right.
But the values that I think Jesus held, or at least Jesus talked as if he held, tend to lean leftist.
Yeah, they actually do.
Right? So the problem with our being so careful to not call ourselves any particular faith, and I think it is caution. I think one of the problems of being on that end of the spectrum is we come out of the mainline churches, historically. And the mainline churches were very focused on the privacy of faith. So we have tended to think that faith is a personal decision, which is one of the reasons we can get along with people of other faiths, is we think that what religion you espouse is not necessarily a tell for who you are.
Yeah.
Which is not great when it comes to politics, because it means that we look like we are religionless, faithless, godless, rather than pro-Jesus, pro-caring for the poor, pro-all of those things. So it seems to me that for those of us on that end of the political spectrum, we need to start putting Jesus right up front.
Yes. Yes, I
Right
agree.
up front.
Completely, I agree with that.
Right up front. So if I were running for political office, my opening salvo would have to be something like, I care about the poor, I am pro-choice, women's autonomy, all of those things, because I care about Jesus, because I try to follow Jesus. Now, I'm not saying everyone needs to follow Jesus, but that's why I do it. Because my relationship with Jesus tells me that each and every person is valuable.
Right, exactly.
Right? But we're so afraid to do that for whatever reason, because we think that we're going to alienate Muslims who believe in Allah, who are liberals. I don't think so.
No, I don't think so.
Right? Part of the problem is that in the mainline churches and the left side churches is we've so divorced them, many of them, the historical churches are a little different, but we've so divorced them from language of Jesus, from language of faith, from language of acting out of that conviction.
Right.
That it's really tough to reclaim that.
Yeah.
But I think that if we care about who's in the house, if we care about who's in government, we need to teach people and demand that they lead off with, as a person of faith, I am required to pay my taxes. Jesus said so.
Yes.
And my tax money, according to Paul and according to actually Peter, but basically the first 10 chapters of Acts, is required to go to people who need it.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's what I'm thinking about all this right now. We've got to get Christian to stop meaning anti-everybody but my people.
Right.
And that's what it means.
And that's exactly what it means.
So Christians, like our line of Christians, Jesus followers, people who think of themselves as caring about God, paying attention to what Jesus told us to do, reaching out to Christ, in some ways really need to name that right up front.
Yes.
So that episode where I said I'm not sure what we should say?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm recanting. If you're a politician.
That's okay. They get different rules.
They do have different rules.
They do have different rules.
Which is why they can be such jerks.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, you're so right. I've been reading quite a bit lately, various articles dealing with where we are right now in politics, and of course everyone's bracing for this election. And then of course we've seen all the antics in the House of Representatives, and it just gets crazier and crazier all the time. But I think that so much of what's going on right now goes right back to Christian nationalists / Republicans, conservative Republicans, who think that God chooses our leaders. And when the leaders that God chooses disagree with their values, then they lose their minds.
Right.
And say that the election must have been stolen because God would never have put Joe Biden in the presidency. He's old and senile and liberal, and why, I mean, it's just.
See, the old, senile, and white actually is for him.
It actually works for him, right? Yeah.
Not that Joe Biden is senile, but yeah.
And of course, I'm sure we don't talk a lot about politics on this podcast, but I'm sure next year being an election year, we will talk more about politics probably than we did this year. And one thing that I think is important for us to think about right now is pay attention to what people are doing, not what they're saying.
Yes.
Pay attention to how they're voting.
Yes.
And pay attention to where their money's coming from.
That is the big one.
Those are money. Big things. And it doesn't matter, because the thing is, somebody will say something to get your vote, but then when it's all said and done, that's not the core of who they are. And I think as Christians in this country, particularly if you are a Christian who cares about democracy, then your vote matters very, very much. And being informed on the issues matters. And don't just believe that somebody espouses all your values just because they belong to the Republican Party or because they belong to the Democratic Party. Please do your research.
Right.
And please learn everything that you can about the issues that you care about so that you're informed.
Right. I feel the need to say that democracy is not a Christian value.
No.
It is a system of government, in our case, it's a system of government which, as a human being who exists in multiple worlds, overlaps with my faith life. Okay? So democracy is not Christian. Kingship is not Christian. Oligarchy is not Christian. None of those things by themselves are ordained by God.
Right.
Period.
Right.
And there's no necessary overlap between being Christian and being a nationalist. In fact, I would say those are divorced. But there's no necessary overlap between being Christian and being pro-democracy or anything else.
Right.
The question is, as a person of faith who's aiming for integrity, who's aiming for wholeness, who's aiming for consistency, and who's aiming for a world where people are treated kindly, what does it mean for me to be a Jesus follower, voting, supporting, giving money to, and so forth?
Yeah.
It is absolutely incumbent upon us to care who's in the house, and not because they're XYZ, but because of how they behave.
Yes. Agreed. We could say much, much more about all of this.
And will next year.
And we will next season. But for now, listeners, we would love to hear from you. We are at cocktailtheology.com. We are not a political podcast, but we have political views.
Yes, we do.
And our political views are informed by our faith and what we know about Jesus and what we know about what it means to be a Jesus follower and what we've learned over all these years. And so we invite you to get on this road with us, and we'll talk a lot more about it next season. But in the meantime, leave us comments, leave us ideas for cocktails or episodes, cocktailtheology.com. We always love hearing from you.
Always.
Always, always. All right, till next time, friends.
Bye.